Hi, everyone, and welcome to TheraWin.Health, your one stop shop for exploring the beauty of culture and therapy. I am Sakshi Verma, your host, and today we have a very special guest with us, Manali Dilalkar, who is a licensed psychotherapist. Hi, Manali, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm very excited to be here and thank you for having me.
For our listeners, this podcast is all about, you know, navigating the complex world of relationships within South Asian cultural context and outside as well. So, if you are an Indian immigrant living in the USA or anywhere in the world or a couple residing in India, this episode is truly for you.
Yeah, it's such an exciting topic to have, right? Because we don't really talk about couples and modern relationships and how what it turn the impact that they might be having and yeah, excited to kind of chat more around this.
That's so true. So, Manali, my first and foremost question to you will be like, as a therapist, what is the word relationship, you know, sounds like to you? So, what does it mean for you?
To me, relationship sounds like commitment and support, right? So you're committed to each other from a lens of helping each other grow, and you're putting in the effort, you're showing up every day, you are not checking out, right? And you are recognizing that things will get difficult and we will work through that difficulty. So there is that commitment aspect that where two parties are coming together and sharing that this is what I'm committing to, not just the good times, but also the difficult times. And then support looks like, either one of us might have a difficult time at some point in our life. And even when we don't have a difficult time, we might just need some encouragement, some sort of validation, some reassurance, because you're kind of going about life trying to figure it out day to day, right? So your partner is your support system and you are the support system for your partner. So kind of making sure that we are sort of helping each other grow, providing that support when, yeah, providing that unconditional support and just being there for the other person, even when you agree with it or not. Mhm.
Yeah, that's so true. Right. So, Manali, it's always a question that arises to me, right? If we see our parents, when our parents they got married, and there was not much such thing as the couple therapist, like people in relationship going to couple therapists and talking about their issues to them, and you know uh, something that they are dealing with, because it's always considered as a very personal issue to
Mhm.
a lot of Indian couples that they don't want to share what's going on in their relationship. So, why do you think there is such a rise in suddenly when we talk about people going and talking about their relationships to the therapists?
Yeah. I think the main thing is um traditionally, like I think couples when they would have a good difficult time, they had two options. One is just suck it up and continue to live how you've been living. So the commitment aspect was there in terms of, okay, we are not separating each other, but the emotional commitment was no longer there, right? Because you're not really emotionally committed to each other, you're just like coexisting together.
Right.
So I think that was the difference. But so couples would just kind of continue as they were despite there being so many concerns, and decide to not get any additional support because the emotional commitment didn't even feel like it was missing, right? So that's one piece. But the other piece was that from what I've heard traditionally, like you would go to your external family, you would go to your elders in the family, and you would go to maybe some distant relative who would then get involved in your relationship to kind of mediate the concerns, mediate the conflicts. So there has been some idea of like, getting some support is just been more like we're going to get support within the family dynamic, within the family unit, not kind of going outward and not sharing our like whatever's going on outside of the family. So there was some form of support on that lens. But I think what's changing is that today more couples are maybe wanting to build that emotional commitment and connection, and that maybe has felt a little more important than it did before. And it sounds like even if maybe it's important, it feels like it's the foundation of the relationship that will make or break the relationship, right? It feels like, okay, if this is not there, then I am going to give myself the choice to take a step back from this relationship. So people are reaching out to couples therapy to build that communication, to build that emotional connection, to resolve conflicts because they want to move forward. And they don't want to just kind of accept that this is what it is in some way. And the other thing is there's so much of like individual, there's a sense of like um, individual happiness in some way that's starting to feel a little more important, which we are also probably taking in from like Western values, right? But like individual happiness has started to feel a little more important. So when a relationship is giving you some concerns, it rocks your individual happiness, and then that's what leads you to maybe seek therapy or couples therapy to kind of help rebuild some of that.
Okay, so Monali, thank you so much for making us understand this. Why couple therapy is being so famous right now, and why people are very much coming forward and talking about it. But I also want to understand, starting from the base level itself, right? So if we see the traditional Indian um, marriages that would happen during our parents, or before that, it's very arranged marriage is very famous in Indian culture, right? And then now suddenly we have moved to people choosing their own partner, and then feeling more proud about it, and then fighting for their love to their parents. So we have kind of seen that tradition, that transition as an Indian person. So are there any trends that were prevalent during the time when people would have arranged marriages, and now that people have shifted to love marriages, quote unquote?
To me, that sounds like what exists in the relationship when you do come together, right? So the process is to help you both meet each other, which is in arranged marriage. Okay, you both are coming together, families are involved. Like there's a lot. You're still building a relationship in a way for a couple of years at the beginning of your marriage, right? So um, I think it is maybe driven by uh, the again the commitment and loyalty aspect to the family, to the marriage system overall. While in love marriages, maybe it's sort of you're coming together by as two individuals and then bringing families in, right? So there's a sense of like, okay, I we already built this relation, we have this relationship, and that commitment and loyalty is to each other, not so much to the family. Remember, it still could be, it's just not the foundation in some way, right? You may feel more of a choice to build that as a foundation. So I think the trend may be more so of like what I think there are so many concerns that come up within a couple and within the relationship aspect when it comes to Indian relationships, right? There are families involved, there's the cultural aspect involved. Um, there are so many like gender roles, there are household chores, work related stuff. So you both are still figuring out where you stand on those values, and whether it's arranged marriage or love marriage, like once you do commit, a lot of these conversations feel a lot more like you're living in it, right? You could have conversations about it, but you're actually coming together and you're living through these values, you're living through what it looks like to, coexist, knowing that there might be some of these differences. So I think, like, I don't know if there might, I think I'm going from a direction of like either way, arrange or love, like it's sort of more like how are we both committing to each other to explore some of these differences that we could have, and even if we don't have differences, how do we allow ourselves to live through some of these values in our relationship, right? So yeah, I think like that's maybe a big piece.
Right,
Mhm.
right. And you mentioned that when, especially in Indian culture, when two couples come together to, get married or being into that relationship, their families are always involved. And we Indians have such large families and
Yeah.
each having different values, different beliefs. So it kind of is very difficult to intertwine it within your relationship, within the
Hmm.
differences that you both has, and then you also have to navigate the differences that both of your families have, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, right. So since this podcast is, surrounded around mental health a lot, so can you share some examples of how couples actually it affects their mental health? You know, that
Yeah.
they know they both love each other, but then they also have to navigate so many different things.
Yeah. I think it does give a lot. It rocks the foundation of the relationship, right? In or like in marriages that have come together by themselves, it rocks the foundation of that relationship. When like families might get involved, or you might be on some different pages when it comes to family engagement. And when arranged marriages, it takes a long time to build that foundation because the initial period is just kind of mending, being with both those families, right? So I think that can be a big difference. So I think family involvement and how you can take a step back or prevent yourself or maintain those boundaries with your kids is a separate topic, right? That's a lot for parents, and that's a lot for other members of the family to talk about. But for the couple, the relationship where the family is getting involved, it, as I mentioned, it rocks the foundation, and that then leads you to feel anxious, it makes you feel depressed, it makes you feel hopeless. There's a lot of hopelessness that I sometimes see in couples where it's like, if this is what it's going to look like, what's the point? Because when there are concerns around family, right, or just the involvement is happening, you and one person in the couple, say for example, starts to get impacted by it, right? Like those conversations, then that person in the relationship will bring that anxiety with them, right? Of like, hey, I'm feeling hopeless, I'm feeling anxious that this keeps happening. While the other person in the relationship, they might not want to engage in this because they're not feeling the same way as this person, right? So it might be hard for them to empathize. That then leads them to avoid the conversation. That then leads them to retract. That then leads them to kind of check out when it comes to these conversations, or it also leads them to maybe try to kind of fix the situation too, right? So in a way, both this conversation then feels a lot more challenging to have, right? Because you both are on different pages. It's bringing this like discomfort between both of you, so you keep putting it off. And then whenever the family involvement comes about, it's once again there's like this like very very uncomfortable. It feels like a turmoil of a conversation overall, right? So um, going back to the mental health aspect, like I think the fact that like family is a part of our life and this might still keep happening brings that hopelessness around, and then that hopelessness as well as the avoidance that both parties could bring then makes the relationship kind of dreading almost, right? Because it's like, oh, like we're not able to move forward from this conversation and that's making
Yeah.
me look at you differently in both parties. Right? And the other piece is your relationship in some way is your anchor in a way, right? You live with your partner, you come back home to your partner, you're doing things with each other. So it kind of can feel one of your anchor, if not the whole. Like it is one of your anchor. So when that's a little shaky, it's like it's kind of bound to make you feel again like really low. It makes you like your motivation gets really you lose your motivation because your mind is very occupied with these concerns. Um, you're also not feeling kind of held by each other, right? Because you're more distant from each other, so you don't feel validated, you don't feel reassured, you don't feel that sense of commitment that you probably once did. So I think all of that also maybe then rocks how you kind of view yourself, your self-esteem, your self-confidence, and yeah, the whole idea of your life starts to feel a little shaky. Mhm.
Mm,
So this
right.
is what I'm seeing a lot with like couples I see where like they're in so much distress and they both want to work this out. They both want to kind of find some solution, but the problem is that they both are stuck in different spaces. So for them to see each other's perspectives and come in between is where like couples therapy or any other form of support could be helpful.
Right, right. And as Indians, we've always been taught of adjusting to the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay, compromise. You know.
Yeah.
So in relationship, one of the people we see are always compromising, and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of suppress uh, their feelings, and once or later it kind of burst out into
Exactly.
bigger problems. And I also feel that gender roles have a very big impact in this, in kind of expectations of adjustment or compromise in an Indian marriage. Right. So, what are your thoughts about it? Do you see that in couples that you kind of counsel or you meet?
Definitely, and that's where I want to reframe the word compromise, right? Like compromise as in what we have been taught as compromise is that it's okay, like you can, you can compromise your work for household stuff. It's like you can compromise these like qualities in the other person for the future of your marriage, etc. So there is a sense of compromise in that sense that we have been taught, but a new way of maybe looking at compromise is that what are some cultural beliefs that you have been exposed to growing up that you're bringing into the relationship, and how can you compromise on making shift in those beliefs, right? So you both are kind of, one of them would be taught that, oh, you should be, for example, going with a very traditional gender role norm, right? Like you're supposed to look after your household. The other is taught that, oh, you're supposed to provide. But these are these beliefs that you hold, and then when you come into the relationship, you bring these beliefs with you until one of them is like, I don't want to do this. Like, I want us to figure some other thing out. I don't want to be doing this. While the other person's like, oh, what? Like, wasn't this, it doesn't everyone do this? Or like, it makes them feel maybe like they're less than or like they're wrong, but like for them it's like, oh yeah, but I've seen this growing up and this is what the belief should be, right? So it's sort of more like, yes, you both of us have certain beliefs and have certain roles that we take with us when we come to the relationship, but the new way of maybe thinking of compromise is how can we both maybe work on challenging some of these beliefs and try to create a thing that works for both of us together in this relationship, right? So it's sort of thinking of, this is a culture, this is a family, we're still connected, but we're slowly forming our own unit. And that's what could look like. Okay, what does that unit look like? And what do we both need to do in order to build that unit and work through that compromise, because compromise gets difficult. There is no denying the fact that like compromise is important in relationships, but when one person is doing it over the other, or one is expected to do it over the other, and traditionally and even now it's usually the women who are expected to do that, so then that's where that like resentment comes about, right? That's where you start to feel detached from the relationship, and that's where we are kind of starting to see people walk out of relationships because it's not a fair game in a way,
Yeah,
right? Mm.
right. Manali, you also mentioned that compromises are normal in relationships, but is it so? You know, isn't relationship all about that you are truly yourself? You know, both the people understand each other. So why do you say that in relationship compromises are bound to happen?
I think there might be a small example, right? So one is your you and your partner have decided to do 50-50 stuff around the home. One day your partner comes and is extremely tired. It's like lethargy and it's their time to cook dinner, for example, right? This is a very small example, but the other person is compromising their own time to show up in the relationship and kind of making cooking the dinner, for example, because they know that like, okay, my partner is not able to show up in the relationship, or not in the relationship for us today because they are tired. So it's sort of more like thinking of compromise in a way where you both are still showing up equally, or showing up together, where you both don't have to compromise for each other, but um the times at which you do that could shift, right? So like you both want to be doing things for each other and wanting to do it for yourself. So it's sort of thinking of the word compromise has a lot of baggage in our Indian culture because it's full of expectations. Here, I'm not talking about expectation. Thinking of compromise as a way for you to see what are ways you can show up in your relationship and show up for the other person's needs, and you won't then feel resentful because the other person's doing the exact same thing, right? So it's like going for a movie which I hate, but I know my partner wants to do it, and I'm going to go for them. That's compromise. It's coming from a place of love. It's coming from a place of showing up. But if I keep going for a movie because the other person wants to do it while they are not doing this, while they are not showing up for certain things I would like to do, that's when that word compromise gets a lot heavier and one-sided, right? So again, I want to emphasize thinking of the modern day word compromise as like showing up to each other, putting in effort to show up to each other's needs, and talking about it when it's maybe not feeling kind of helpful, or like this dynamic is shifting a little bit, and being in communication around that.
What about those couples who are not able to communicate, you know, this feeling to their partner? Like, suppose they know they do not like that movie that their partner want to watch, but they're
Mm-hmm.
still showing up every
Yeah.
time and then, and it's kind of exhausting, right? Because you don't like doing something that your partner wants,
Yeah.
but you're also not able to communicate that to your partner.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can be some ways that they can do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's where the biggest challenge lies, right? Of like in the communication in the couple relationship, and we are not taught what it's like to communicate. So, um, one of us might be an over communicator and like to share what's going on for us, while the other person might suppress their feelings. So it's again, it doesn't feel helpful. One way that I like to, share um, with people who find it difficult to communicate is asking themselves, what are you afraid of, or what's stopping you from communicating? Is it that the other person would never understand or would not take my needs into consideration? Okay, has your partner shared that or showed that, um, where they felt that, okay, your needs are maybe too much, or like, no, I'm not gonna do that, or have dismissed you? They might say yes, they have said that. Then it's more like, okay, then it's not just on you, right? It's also your partner who needs to share and validate and accept that, like, okay, my partner's just showing this, sharing this need. What else can I say instead of like, nah, I'm not doing that, right? Like, what's some other vocabulary? So that's where they both need to come together and get that support. Um, but if the person who is struggling to share their needs also suggests that, no, actually my partner is pretty good at, like, they don't ever make me feel like I'm asking for too much, they're validating me, then it's more like, okay, maybe historically you've probably felt that your needs were too much and you were dismissed for it. And this maybe is a relationship that's kind of challenging that narrative, right? But can we maybe explore trying out in very small stakes, right? Where maybe it's not a very big need, it's a need where it's movie, for example, could be a small stake for this person. So it's like, let me try doing this the next time we go for a movie and see what my partner says. That can help build their trust with their partner and build this sense of like, acceptance that, no, I can slowly try bringing stuff up, right? So you're not overnight going to become an over communicator or a communicator, right? It's sort of more like small steps to help build that credibility. While when it comes to you sharing your needs and your partner dismissing it, that then leads you to not want to share your needs. What you both as a couple could do as a as an exercise is, firstly, recognize that this is a concern, that this is an issue, and that you both don't have the tools to communicate. So there is nothing wrong with either of you or the relationship. It's something that you both need to build upon, where you both are trying to figure out, what else could I say in this moment to feel heard or to make my partner feel heard. So that's when you both can maybe come together and practice using I statements, right? Like, I want to be doing this, or I feel like when we go for a movie, I'm not able to share what I want to be, the movie that I want to be watching, right? So that sounds a lot more like it's coming from an authentic, genuine space. While when you say you statements, like, you always take us to a movie that you want to be watching. Sure, the intent is the same in both statements, but feels a lot more accusatory. You could use that during a fight, but not when you're trying to repair the relationship. That's not going to be helpful, right? So, kind of using some I statements could be a helpful piece, while the other person who maybe is not used to hearing the needs or tends to dismiss it, just maybe learning to kind of take this in. A lot of times what I also see in couples is that the other person might not think it's as big of a deal for for the person who is not able to share needs, right? So that's when they dismiss, that's when they invalidate, while the person who is not able to share the needs is like, oh my god, this person dismissed me again, right? So it's sort of, this conversation also helps to be like, no, this is actually really bothering me, can you please hear me out? And the other person to also take that sincerely, that request sincerely, and show up in that conversation. So there's a lot of emotional work, I think, that's involved in doing all of that, right? And it goes back to my point of emotional commitment. Sometimes people are like, I'm done, I can't do this, or like, they don't want to engage in that emotional commitment. Past trauma or anxiety, depression also prevents them from showing up with that emotional commitment. So all of that leads to then checking out, right? But to actually not check out and do the work both personally and as a relationship, it takes so much effort. And it's like, yeah, even right now, just sharing that, like, that conversation in itself can be so overwhelming. Mhm.
Right, right. So, Manali, for what advice would you give to the couples who want to initiate this conversation, right? That suppose you kind of understand that your partner hasn't seen all of these emotions that you're feeling in their own family or while growing up. So, you kind of want to understand the background that they're coming from, understand their own um, feelings of about this relationship and different dynamics. So how can you initiate the conversation about asking them their past traumas, their past feelings that they have seen in their own family? Because it's
Yeah.
always considered a topic that is not shared, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you don't wanna scare your partner away that, oh my god, they're blaming my parents about all the
Yeah.
things that is happening here.
So, like, why do you want to be doing it, right? So why do you, what helps you if you want to learn more about them, what would that help you with? And sometimes for some people, it might go to a place of like, it might help me understand the other person more and understand why they do what they do. It might help me explore and imagine a future for us where, like, okay, how do we want to maybe change certain qualities with or change certain behaviors that we both hold for the future of our relationship, right? So it can come, so kind of first thinking of for yourself that why would you like to know this, and the intention behind wanting to know it. Um, but to answer your question directly, I think a helpful way to start off is with consent, right? Of like, hey, I would like to know a little bit about your trauma, or I would like to know about your background, or what was it like growing up with your parents. And that's more so to help me understand you, right? So whenever you're ready, I would love you can let me know and we can talk about it. This way, you're not forcing the other person to open up before they even ready to open up. They would probably open up to you, given that you're their partner. They seem to have some safety with you, but maybe in that moment they might choose not to because they're still not sure about it for themselves, or they're still working through it themselves. So that consent helps the other person to come into the conversation when they are ready as well, right? So that is maybe point one. The other point is also having these conversations when you're not triggered, right? So don't use it as ammo on each other that like, oh yeah, like it's because of your trauma that you're behaving this way with me. Intention again could be coming from a good place, but in a sense that you're kind of trying to understand each other. But in that moment during a fight, like it sounds like not a good thing to use against the other person, right? So um letting yourself letting yourself ground yourself, and only bringing these conversations up, or trying to only bring these conversations up when you are a little more in a place where you both can just have a general conversation and are not in a conflict.
Yeah, right. Manali, this just one question comes up to me, and it can be very controversial. But out of all the couples that have come to you or have reached out to you, does the conflict usually arise from their own internal conversation, or do we see the conflict arising when their in-laws or the extended family is involved?
Hmm.
What is the proportion of couples who usually reach out for
Yeah,
couples?
this is a great question, not controversial at all, because it's a little challenging, right? Like, what I've seen is that most of the South Asian couples that struggle with are actually struggling with family, in laws, and parents' involvement. Um, and yeah, it's so different from maybe couples who are not South Asians, right? Like, you see the difference. Um, and then because of the family involvement, there might still be other concerns, but they start to go more in the background. So you almost don't have the time and space to kind of even work through some of them, because this is such a big thing in the room.
Mm, yeah, that's a great idea.
Mhm.
But still, you know, we as South Asian people, we are kind of very much protected of our families, you know. So we do not want to hear even from our partners, the person
Mhm.
that we love the most, coming from them that I'm facing this issue because of your family.
Exactly.
So how can couples initiate this conversation without actually hurting the other person? That, see, I am facing this issue, or we as couple are facing this issue because of your family or because of my family.
Yeah. I think it's a hard thing to avoid, right? Like there will be a discomfort at the beginning because there will be discomfort at the beginning because you're not, because of the exact dynamic that you shared, right? Like there is, I think it's hard for us to keep ourselves, if we can, if we are able to recognize that this is a concern, then exactly how you shared it, right? Like, I'm having this concern, can we talk about it, right? While sometimes, or a lot of times, the things build up so much that it reaches a point where it's like it's just a lash out, right? And in that moment it's very hard for you to kind of compose yourself, and it's hard for the other person to see what you're talking about, and they go into that protective shell. So a lot of couples who come into couples therapy have reached some form of an acceptance stage where, yes, we are having family concerns, we both are seeing things differently here, but we want to prioritize our relationship and move forward from this conversation. So there is a little bit of, like, you know, they have reached a state where they feel a little more grounded, a little more accepting of this difference. While at the beginning, what I've seen is that it just kind of builds up so much at a certain point, right? That it's so, and sometimes it's very hard to, sometimes what I've seen is that, like, it's hard for them to have, it's hard for a lot of us to kind of like just, um you almost normalize it. You're like, oh, this is okay. All families go through this, or like all in-laws are like this, or all parents are like this, right? So you normalize it in your mind, and the other partner normalizes it in their mind. That then it keeps adding up, not recognizing that this is actually making me feel sad or making me feel rejected or disappointed, right? But all those feelings are hard to notice during that time, so then it builds up and then it sort of, yeah, it comes out. So I think it, in some way, I wish we have a solution, but but then that's where the topic, the other conversation comes up, right? Of like, how can families also be respectful of this relationship? How can they start to maybe recognize that, again, I don't even know where to start there, right? Because it's such a, for them it's like, oh, we are just caring for our kids, but they don't recognize the impact that they are having. So there's a lot of stuff there. So until that keeps happening, this might keep happening. But then what's helping is that they're like, no, no, we need to stop, we need to find a different way to work on this. And then that's where the couple starts to take a different direction in a way. So I think the initial stage, I feel, is kind of inevitable until, like, sort of this keeps happening, in my opinion. But I hope we can find different ways of working through that.
And um, Manali, all of these issues that, you know, couples usually face in their time, how can couple therapy be a guide to it, a cure to it?
Couples therapy, I think, to put it very softly, it's a space where you prioritize your relationship. So it's 50 minutes of your time once a week where you're coming and talking about each other and the relationship, right? It could be a way of you showing up to each other. How it might be supportive is that it helps, what I said earlier a few minutes ago, in terms of the exercise. It could help you do exactly that, where you're understanding the other person's perspective. You're trying to hear and understand the other person's internal world, right? Because sometimes outside of therapy, when you're in your day to day, you have like life going on, it's hard to do a heart to heart in that moment, right? So you don't know really why is my partner saying this, and then you react to it, right? So couples therapy helps to come and help you build those tools of like, okay, maybe in that moment you're not able to, but can you give yourself some time a little later when you've grounded yourself, where you can practice this thing of like asking each other questions, clarifying certain things, and also providing that reassurance that the other person might need. Then it also helps to work through some past conflicts, right? So, like, especially in, as I mentioned, like with in laws or with parents, some conflicts might keep building up, which you never, which was really hard to work through during those times. So, it helps you as a relationship to come together and share that, yes, I was upset with my parents or yeah, my in laws, but I was also upset with you for how you behaved there, right? So my anger is going towards them, but I never really got a chance to feel angry towards you. And then you're kind of like recognizing that these conflicts from the outside have actually created these cracks in the foundation, and we want to work on that together.
Understood, understood. And still, I see a lot of couples are very much, susceptible to trying out couples therapy, knowing that it might just help them, and also knowing that they are kind of, you know, if not the couple, if not the talking about these issues to the therapist, they are somewhere taking it out, right? Maybe to their friends or maybe to their partners itself, you know, in one
Yeah.
form or the other. So, why is it that this is happening? What are some common misconceptions or resistance towards couples therapy in the South Asian community?
Mm. I think that the biggest common one is the cultural belief that you shouldn't bring an outside stranger into our relationship issues, right? So that's one piece. Um, the other one is you don't really recognize that these might be deeper concerns. I think you feel like, okay, I'm annoyed with my partner, I'm gonna go vent it out to someone, right? So I think that might also be feeling like, okay, you feel like they might be just surfacey questions, so it's sort of easy to get through, but and they might be, but it just kind of continues, and that's where couples therapy comes into place. um I think the other one is, I think, a very common misconception is that only people who are actually having struggles or are on the verge of breaking up go to couples therapy. And I want to say that's not true, right? Like yes, it's commonly because of the same misconception. Most of the people who do end up coming are towards the are having a challenging time, are towards separation. But couples therapy as a whole is not meant for that, right? It's meant to help you connect more with each other, to help you build that dynamic, right? So even though it might be common, it doesn't make it only for that space. So for so even if it's common that breakup times, other times when couples therapy is warranted, it's not only meant for that either. And um in fact, like even in therapy, individual therapy, we talk about it. The earlier you come in, or like the earlier you are able to kind of work through some of the concerns that you're experiencing, you have more resilience to work on that, right? So yeah, I think that's also a very big misconception. Um, and hopefully people who just want to understand their partner more, connect with each other more, kind of thinking of it as like growing the relationship more, could also access it. The other thing is couples therapy is expensive. It's not always accessible, right? So people might just not feel the drive to come into it, when they might feel like, okay, we can just work through some of these concerns on our own, which is amazing. So but I think the accessibility piece also. prevents one from seeking care until it's necessary.
Thank you so much for joining us for this podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much. And this was really fun. And yeah, thank you for choosing this topic with your wonderful questions.
Thank you so much. Is there any, last minute advice that you would like to give us or to our, listeners?
Yeah, that like you both or anyone in the couple is coming in with their own worldview and own perspective, and you can build a relationship where you can allow yourselves to challenge certain worldviews and belief systems so that you can show up to your partner in a way. So, yeah, I think kind of continuing to do that and continuing to build that emotional connection and knowing that it's okay to know that like you don't know how to communicate and it's okay to ask for support around that.
Right. Thank you so much
Okay.
for joining us.
Thank you.